It is a privilege to have the ambassador and his wife and son with us today. You'll find as you listen to the ambassador that he has a very interesting and unique background. He made the comment to me yesterday or the other day that I found fascinating because I see that he's a man of action, and he says, I was a hired gun to make things happen. Well, I can understand why one would want him working for him and to make things happen. The ambassador's had a very distinguished background. He's held the position of State Secretary at the Ministry of Defense from 2001 to 2003, as well as various postings within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, including Director General of the Division of International Organizations and Security Policy from 1999 to 2001. He was Director of the Department of Analysis and Planning from 98 to 99, Liaison Officer to the NATO headquarters in Brussels from 94 to 98, and Head of the Analytical Unit in the Department of Analysis and Planning in 1994. He was appointed as ambassador to the United States and presented his papers on September 8th, 2003. So he's just completing 3.5 years of his assignment here in the United States. He has been very effective in what he has done. We're most honored to have him with us today, and may I invite you to join me in welcoming the ambassador to give a lecture to us today. Thank you.
Dr. Peterson, thank you very much for a kind introduction. Good morning to all of you. I'm a little scared now because so many raised hands on physical experience with Slovakia and even having a Slovak young lady here. That means I'm not speaking to a completely pristine audience. But then, I'm just kidding. I know that coming to BYU and talking to class like yours, it's coming to an educated audience. So I really would prefer not to give you a lecture like a professor is coming and teaching whole hour to talk to you. But I take this as a great opportunity to me to get in interaction with you, maybe to learn even from you the way you pose questions and the things you are interested into. That's a way of learning to me. And maybe then to focus into the areas which might be closer to your interest. So maybe just for the introduction, I'll say a couple of words of Slovakia, to set Slovakia in its environment, to look at Slovakia, how we fit into region, into Europe, and come from there to where we are in the Slovak-US relationship, but also Slovakia today being part of European Union and part of NATO. We always work in a broader context. It's not just Slovakia. But anyway, Slovakia, when you would look at the map, which is just here at the wall, and you would look at the size of the United States, and then you would look at the size of Slovakia over there, you can see, we are 5.5 million nation, which is small in size, which is the size roughly of Virginia, maybe Virginia and West Virginia combined together. It's a small country in Europe, by geography something like Belgium. My nation size about like Danes, Norwegians, Finns, little less than Czechs, Hungarians, little more than Latvians, Lithuanians, Slovenians. So on that scale, you can just find what Slovaks are. In terms of who we are and where we come from, and it's always good to know who you are and means where you come from, and it even sometimes can tell you where you go to. Slovaks is a unique nation. We used to live together in a marriage with Czechs, often abroad being confused as a Czechoslovak nation. There never has been any nation like Czechoslovak. We were, in terms of statehood, one nation, Czechoslovak nation, for more than 70 years. Czechoslovakia was created after the World War I. And Czechs and Slovaks found a good marriage for more than 70 years in this. But I should look back a little bit in the history of region and in the history of Slovaks, so we have a good understanding. Because one of the questions I could anticipate would be why Slovaks and Czechs divorced if the marriage was so good for 70 years. Why you divorce after good marriages? You don't do that. So I look into how Slovaks were shaped by history, and then we can understand also why certain things happened. Slovaks are one of the, what we would call the West Slavic nations. We would be close to heritage to Czechs, Poles, and some of the Western Balkan nations. When tribes started to move, Slavic tribes, westward, there was an empire created, a kind of a proto-Slavic kingdom, which was called the Kingdom of Great Moravia. If you would look at my first name, Rastislav was one of the first kings of Great Moravia. He was the one who, by history, brought Christianity to Central Europe. He was the one who invited two bishops from those days, Constantinople, today's Istanbul, who came down and taught Christianity to Slovaks. They were the first to produce Bible in local language and invent a new type of writing. Those days it was hard to say who were Slovaks, who were Czechs. This was kind of a proto-nations of tribes who then separated, and the main cause of separation was coming of Hungarians into the region. Slovaks fell under the influence of Hungary and were part of Hungarian kingdom for almost 900 years. Czechs for a couple of centuries, they got their own Czech kingdom, their own Czech kings. So we started physical separation, it means territorial and national separation, somewhere around the year 900. Since then, we were part of Hungarian kingdom until 1918. We met together with Czechs in a larger arrangement, which was called Austro-Hungarian Empire. In this, we lived for a couple of centuries. Bratislava, and this was funny arrangement because Austro-Hungarian, two things. All of those composed from smaller parts. This was a hugely multinational state. I even tend to think that this was kind of a early European Union model, maybe to those days integrated even more than today's modern European Union, politically, and I mean in all aspects, even economically. In these multinational arrangements, there were two major parts, Austrian part and Hungarian part. Every ruler has got a double title. The title of a ruler was the king and the emperor, Kaiser and how it was in König and this means emperor and the king. The emperor was title for Rome being the Roman Empire, emperor, and this was the title given for the Austrian part. And the other part was the king, king of Hungary. For almost 300 years, the coronation, more than 200 years, coronation place was Bratislava. And this was, in its current Slovak capital, this was during the time when Ottoman Empire expanded and stopped in the suburbs of Vienna and took most part of today's Hungary. When you today travel to Slovakia, you find in capital the huge cathedral, which was the coronation place for more than 200 years for a number of Austro-Hungarian kings and emperors. Even the famous empress Maria Theresia was coronated down in Bratislava. Today we do an annual celebration of that in the fancy in fancy clothing, and it's an imitating, and it's a kind of historical memory for the coronation. We come to 1918, and maybe in question and answers time, if you will want to inquire about the relationship, I can tell you more. But until 1918, that's a very important time in our history. Czechoslovakia was created on the decay of Austro-Hungarian Empire. This was on the result of a very bad course of history in World War I, which was one of the most horrible and tragic wars in European history so far then. An invention of machine guns and battle gas and poison gas all these clever humans' inventions how to kill each other, it caused unusual casualties and tragedies. The principle of how to call it, you have me in English translation, it says self-determination of nations, the famous Wilsonian principles led to creation, thank you very much, led to creation of Czechoslovakia. Understand why we got into this, we have to look at the composition of then whole region, what was then Czechoslovakia. If Czechs wanted to apply this principle, it would be very hard, because on the Czech lands, about more than 30% of people were of German origin. All western parts of Czech Republic and some northern parts were German. In Slovakia, on the other hand, we got huge trouble to find out what is the southern border of Slovakia. We got no problem with western border with Czechs, because being part of for 900 years of kingdom with Hungary, the border was clean. Northern border was also clean, because plus minus with little shifts, Poland and Austro-Hungarian Empire were separated clearly for a long time. But in southeast and southern border, this was very, very, very difficult to find out what it is. Because for 900 years, being part of Hungarian kingdom, you find a lot of Slovak settlements in southern parts of Hungary, in Croatia, in Romania today. But also in some parts of Slovakia, there was a Hungarian population living and also Croatian population living, and some German settlements which were brought in medieval years when mining was starting to be developed in Slovakia. So this was difficult to put together. When the leaders of those days looked into this, and there was still an intellectual affiliation based on Slavic roots between Czechs and Slovak intellectual leaders, they found that if you would look at Czechoslovakia, how that was created, the Czechoslovak political nation then would have more than 80%, altogether about 85% on the territory, which made sense, and thus Czechoslovakia was created. Czechoslovakia 1918 was a democratic country with the constitutional type, parliamentary type of democracy, common in most of today's European countries, slightly different as what you would find in the presidential system here in the United States, but it's more nuanced than a difference in substance. It was very prosperous country. When it came to the World War II, Slovakia was one of the best economies in the world. It was ranking by the World War II about 10th place among the world economies, which was pretty good. It was quite industrial and highly developed country. Slovak crown during the World War II was equal to a Swiss franc, which I wouldn't mind today. I mean, maybe a couple of years to go, but maybe it will come again. The history then went crazy in Europe, and I'm stressing this. I'm stressing first World War I, World War II, because you will see it will serve some purpose. History went crazy again. Slovakia was part of war as most of the other European countries. We became shortly independent. Independent was weird because this was an independence, which was an independence, how you would call it, and controlled independence. An independence which was imposed on you. When our leader was called to Berlin and Adolf Hitler said to then President Tiso, you will become independent, or under our patronage and our guidance, or we will just military invade you and we'll annex you, and that's it. You know history of World War II. I don't have to go into that. Slovakia survived that and rejoined together with Czech part again, having 2 brief years of democratic history again from 46-47. In 48, communists took over. They won in western part of Czechoslovakia in Czech lands. That's why we were joking all the time in Slovakia for this communist rule that we were the only country where communism came from the west, because all others has got communism imported from the east. 40 years of communist rule was very, very unfortunate part of our history. I was just talking while waiting for this lecture how history of Europe could have been different and how it could look if it was not these 40 years of communism. Today, study of the affairs after '89, what was Velvet Revolution, we became again democratic and very fastly developing nation. We separated from Czechs in 1993. On January 1993, we became independent country. However, today's relationship is even better than before. If you would ask polling questions about the sentiment, who you would choose to live next to you, or who would be the most favorite nation to you, Czechs would always lead on Slovak side, and vice versa for Czechs. Slovaks were always the most favorite nation. Americans, they tend to be in Slovakia the third, but it's getting worse, I can tell you. Slovakia is a young nation, 1993, short time ago. It's a young state, it's an old nation. That's the right expression to use. We've been through ups and downs. 1994 to 1998, we thought that we can take a very specific model of behavior, which was strange and not good, and it harmed Slovakia. We skidded a little bit behind our neighbors. The closest neighbors to us since our independence would be countries which we call Visegrad 4. Visegrad, it's a little town in Hungary in which presidents meet and establish very informal way of collaboration between today 4 nations. It's the Poles, Czechs, Slovaks, and Hungarians. Still today, we are very close 4 nations. We, all of us together and individually, struggle to rejoin mainstream of politics in Europe and transatlantic region, and this was to join European Union and North Atlantic Alliance. We thought that by Berlin Wall and by the Cold War division, the Europe was separated very unjustly, and by the virtue of history, we just finished at the wrong side of the fence. I don't like the fence, but I don't like the walls. But if somebody else would put up the wall, you want to be on the right side of the wall. For Slovaks and some other nations, definitely for Germans, Poles, Czechs, Hungarians, and many others who were free nations by their heritage, we ended up on the bad side of the wall. It was bad luck for 40 years. We struggled together to join European Union, to join the mainstream of European politics. We were successful a few years ago. 2004 was the year when we formally joined European Union. We enlarged European Union to 25 nations. This year, in January, just a few months ago, we enlarged again by 2, Romania and Bulgaria, which makes European Union today 27. 27 countries with almost 500 million of people, with the economy, one of the strongest economy in the world. Slovakia individually is also a member of OECD. You would know what OECD means. Sometimes it's called the club of richest nations in the world. We are the 30th and the last member of OECD. Slovakia today is one of the fastest growing, if not the fastest growing economy in European Union today. Last year the growth was almost 10%. This year conservative estimate is for about 9%. It's very healthy growth. Inflation is about 1.5%. What you can see, it's always extremely difficult on fast-growing nations to get inflation under control. Slovakia is having very good inflation. We are hoping to join European Monetary Union soon, in 2009, and we got all ingredients there that Slovakia will be part of this. Now, if you would pick me on it, maybe to conclude this, because this would little bit cast on light where the relationship between Slovaks and Americans is today. When you would ask me what is the issue in Slovak-US relationship, I would pick as a challenge. Then I would pick one issue, but I pick it for the illustration of relationship. It's the visa waiver issue, and it's a relationship issue. U.S. has played great role in European history, not only in the history of Slovakia, but also in the history of the United States. Today we tend to forget about this role. If I go back to creation of Czechoslovakia, which was extremely important for historical survival of Slovaks, our wise leaders, actually, they have met here in the United States, in town of Pittsburgh. And one of the fundaments and one of the basic documents and political statements of the future of Czechs and Slovaks and their democratic future was the Pittsburgh Declaration, happened in the United States. That was the President of the United States, President Wilson, who laid his 17 principles, which helped Slovakia politically to negotiate its creation after World War I. Again, a role of the United States. The conclusion, actually the finding the solution to World War I, United States again playing extremely important role in this part of history. World War II, U.S. troops has liberated then Czechoslovakia almost to middle of the Czech Republic. And I'm sorry, really sorry, they were not a little faster. Just a little faster. If they had made it a little, 150 miles east, I'm sure that the course of history of our country would have been completely different. And again, after 1989, that was the U.S., which was advocating concept of Europe whole and free, democratic, prosperous together. Today, we are part of Europe whole and free. We are one of the most dynamic part of Europe whole and free. Slovaks being, on the sentiment, one of the nations closest to the Americans, often accused within the European Union discussion being too much pro-American. However, as any relationship in your life, when you're young, you're in the age of our daughter, all of you, and we got some experience of relationship with my wife already, more than 20 years. So they say if you want to keep your relationship good, it must be fair relationship. You must have a feel that the relationship is balanced, that it's both-sided, it's a reciprocated relationship, and you have to feed the relationship. If you go into relationship in one moment where you think it's feeding on itself or it's one-sided, then it's just the shortcut to the end of that relationship. Here the relationship, Slovak-US relationship, but not only Slovak-US relationship, but sort of this new European countries-US relationship, is becoming a little bit on the feeling like not completely balanced. Europe becoming whole and free again, but separated by an emotional issue of visa waiver. And when I say Austrians wants to come, like visit the United States, you just grab your passport, you sit in the plane, and you go. For Slovaks, if you were in the age of your Slovak schoolmate here, and if you just say you want to see New York, take pizza there, stroll around, and then go home, you would have almost zero chance to get visas for that. Almost zero chance. And I think it's poisoning relationship quite so. But this is just a cherry on the top, or just a tip of the iceberg of the relationship. I know, and I conclude with this, U.S.-European relationship has been extremely important, not only to both of us, I mean to Europeans and Americans, but to the rest of the world. When you would look at the United States and European Union today, it's almost 1 billion. And even if you would look at European Union and the United States and other countries who would be very closely attached, like Canada, Australia, Japan, who are politically very closely and economically attached, it's more than 1 billion. And this would be how much? 85% of the world economy. It would be maybe 90% of the world trade. In this relationship, it's extremely important. Whole fundamentals of the U.S. society is based on the heritage, is based on the Christian heritage, which was coming from Europe. This is extremely important, but we have some challenges lying ahead. But then I leave to question and answers because I've been already talking more than I intended. So thank you for your attention. Ready to take whatever difficult questions you would want to ask.
May I remind you when you ask the question that Jana has the microphone, and we have a question up here.
We can check your Slovak, you know.
I'm just going to do this in English because my Czech's not fantastic. But now I know there's a communist party still in Slovakia that's pretty strong. What would happen if they were to win the election? Would the country go and be like it was during communism, or what exactly would happen?
Slovakia is having very small communist party today, and that is a good question because it gives me a little wider ground to explain the differences between the nations in our part of the world. When you would look at what was Czechoslovakia and the Czech and Slovak part, in today Czech Republic, the communists would be quite strong. They would have about 20% of vote. And in addition to that, they got a Social Democratic Party, which is also a leftist party, not that left as communist, but leftist party. So altogether in the Czech Republic, communist plus Social Democrats, they will have well over 50%. In Slovak Republic, when you would look in the Slovak political structure, we got 7 parties. I think we have 7 parties now in the parliament. See how bad I am. 7. And Communist Party is not is not a political party, which is constitutional party, means part of the National Council, part of National Parliament. They got about, in the last elections, they got about 2.5%, 3%, I don't know, something funny. You have 5% threshold to get into the parliament. So they are, we call it a non-parliamentary party, which means a neglectable party. Slovaks are, in this respect, Slovaks are non-communist by the mentality. There are some bad news and there are some good news about this. Slovaks are more linked to the old heritage. Slovaks are more conservative by nature. Slovaks would be much more linked to the ancestry. And definitely the ancestry in Slovakia is not the communist ancestry. And even in 1948, when communists took over a whole Czechoslovakia, in Slovakia they gained very small percentage. Actually then Democratic Party gain was 60% in 1948. And Democratic Party of those days was kind of a center-right, slightly conservative, agrarian, free entrepreneurship party, something which would be kind of a midstream of Republican Party here in the United States, in my judgment. But on overall national scale, communists prevailed in the Prague, which was the central government, so they took over the whole country. But this is one of the differences between Slovaks and Czechs. Czechs always tended to lean more towards the social democracy. Slovaks leaned more towards the more conservative approach in life. Religion, for example. I was just asked the question a few minutes ago before coming in the room, how Slovaks would place the role of religion in their life. And I just saw not long time ago a polling on the scale of whole European 27 nations. And the question was, where do you place religion in your life? Is it important or is it not important in your life? Slovaks were high on this scale. In answers, yes. Czechs, they were low on this scale, saying no. So this is one of a nuance difference in the region. What it would be, you see, look at Czech Republic today. They got social democratic government for 4 years then, and now they got split 50-50. So you see Czech Republic working on the social democratic government with support of communists in the parliament, and they are doing fine. It's a free society, democratic, prosperous, quickly growing, more than any of you who's been there. I think they are doing very fine. So in today's Europe, and when you are part of European Union, when you are part of this mainstream of politics, as I mentioned to you, the checks and balances on how the government, how the governance, how the country runs, how it ticks, those checks and balances are so strong that just to think that any of the European Union countries just easily can today convert to a authoritarian rule, I think it would be very theoretical concept. I don't think there is any ground in any of 27 countries for that. But you go, sometimes you got more clever government, sometimes you got less clever government. Sometimes you got government which is more in flavor you like. Sometimes it's in a flavor you don't. That's a charm and curse of democracy.
There's a question behind you.
Hi. I've just read recently that the U.S. is planning on installing some anti-missile radar equipment in the Czech Republic and Poland, and that Russia opposes that. Where does Slovakia stand? And are there any plans that they'll be placed in Slovakia?
Tough question. Of course, we knew about this. We've known about this. This is a part of Star Wars, how it's sometimes called by a simplified acronym, by the missile defense system, which is designed to prevent our presumed nuclear attack on the United States by by means of long-range ballistic missiles. And since my defense and security background, I completely understand the project. There are some nations in Europe, there are most of the nations in Europe, frankly, who put a number of questions on this. The main point of dispute over this project was that shouldn't we go ahead as the alliance, and we have the North Atlantic Alliance, which is here for more than 50 years, which has been extremely efficient instrument of security in Europe, which was a backbone for European Union integration, which prevented Cold War clash, which was always a credible defense. So shouldn't we go ahead together and do 26 plan and to produce a anti-missile defense which would be serving the United States purpose and also European purpose? I think, frankly, I think United States tried this. But you find on the European side some complexities in some nations who would, when I work at NATO, and I've been NATO, in my life many times, and I sit around NATO Council, and the charm of NATO Council is a big round table where you've got ambassadors representing every nation. You've got 26 ambassadors sitting around table, and everybody in a highly confidential room, in a highly confidential mood, top secret, classified, everything can say whatever you want. And I can tell you there will be at least one ambassador in the room, at least one, who would always say something else than what you as ambassador would say. And you will not get me to specify that ambassador, but at least one, sometimes more. So I think that the mood to have this defense as a joint tool for 26 was not realistic. And when you will look at today at some states like North Korea having that capability of long-range missiles, look at some others like current nuclear program of Iran. However, that's more threat to Europe than to the United States. It's more threat to Israel and Europe than to anybody else today. I don't know of tomorrow. Nobody would doubt good intentions of Russia. It's not Cold War anymore. But history taught us that you have to be cautious on your defense. So I would understand the concept and the meaning of building the missile defense for the United States. Today, those who are critical about these new installations, and you would find those in Canada, you would find those on some places in Europe, and you would find those on some places in the Middle East and somewhere else. So it's not just being Poland and Czech Republic. The components of the system are built on a number of places on the earth. Today, the opponents would say, first of all, it serves narrow American purpose. It's one issue of criticism. Second, is they doubt the efficiency, because there were some tests on the system which has proven that the system is not that sophisticated as it would be desired, and may not produce a desired level of security. And there will be a couple of other negative comments on this. But in my view, I think the plan is good. I think the U.S. is obliged and should do everything in its powers to guarantee security for the country. And that's what every government is about, because government is not something given by God. That's a choice of people. You vote for people who represent you, and you expect of them to take good care of all of you. Means you want your country to be safe and prosperous. That's the bottom line of why you have the government. So I think your government is obliged to take any measures to make your country safe. Is it in the interest of Europeans that the U.S. is safe? My answer is yes. If for anything else, if we would be just only selfish, if I would forget about all sentimental things and sentimental stuff about the role of the United States in European history, just being selfish, if I would look at the role of United States economy is playing, what the dollar is playing, and how European economy is cross-linked with the U.S. economy, if there was a major attack on the United States and your economy would suffer, all of us would suffer. It's impossible that it wouldn't leak. All of us would go through a major, major crisis. So again, I'm coming to my point, which I made at the end of presentation. United States, Europe, and I would hate to call it satellites because it's not truth. I mean in the good terms, those who are closely politically and economically cross-connected. We make more than 80% of the world economy. So attack on anybody in the system would be bad. What would be position of Slovakia on this? I'm afraid it would be complicated, like it's in any country in Europe. Being anti-American is fashionable today in Europe. It goes beyond rational, in my judgment. People tend to forget quickly, quicker than we would expect. So if you would put this on a referendum in any European country, I think that the response would be no in every single European country, including Slovakia. And actually, let me take this also to illustrate. It's getting worse year by year. And there is not, I think, there is some research on this. At least what I know, it's very comprehensive and it's good to look at. And you can check it on the webpage of GMF, German Marshall Fund, the United States. They got a lot of affiliated branches in Europe, and they do extensive research on the mood, on transatlantic mood. And they ask a whole set of questions which are related to the role of United States in world, in security, and what is the sentiment, how people see, how people feel about this relationship. And there are some conclusions on this. And it's done for a couple of years, so you can check the track record of this. And it's not going fine, it's going worse, which is sad. So if today installation was about to be raised in Slovakia, it would have to be decision of the government, because if it was decision by people, it would never happen. But here maybe one thing I should say, because you study politics. I hate referendums. I think referendum is a major failure of democracy. And if people would do things, if governance would be done by referendums, people would be just going into disastrous future. So leaders should have courage and wisdom to lead, and not to wake up in the morning checking on the public opinion polls what they are supposed to do. That would be my last highly insensitive comment.
Recently, concerns been raised about Russian cutoffs of natural gas supplies to Europe through Belarus and things of that nature. Tony Blair and Angela Merkel have tried to counter this by proposing like a wind farm in the North Sea. I was wondering what measures Slovakia has taken to try and ensure its energy security in the future.
It's a very good question. And as you see about your economy, how dependent the economy is on the gas and oil supplies, for Europe it's even worse. In Europe there are just few nations like Norwegians and very, very few others who's got some supplies. Norwegians, okay, they can even export. But Slovaks, for example, we got just some small supplies of natural gas in Slovakia, which is far, less than we need to consume. And so overall, we are almost 100% dependent on oil and gas. Unfortunately, in Slovak case, it almost all comes from, in a crude sense, it all comes from the areas east of us, it's Russia and down south in the Central Asian parts. We still use the old infrastructure which was set up in the days of Comecon, and the dependence is still here. But it's not only Slovak case. This is Polish, this is Czech, even German to a great extent. I think should have been done much more on the diversification of resources, but it's not easy because the infrastructures are extremely, extremely costly. And it's not only about pipelines, because you can always build a pipeline which is not that costly. But if we just build pipeline and you start to take oil from North Africa or from Venezuela or I don't know where from, you find that the refineries which are built in Slovakia, they are built for specific type of oil. So it's not only about fitting the different pipeline, but it's also converting whole technology, which is quite complicated and extremely costly. And refinery at the end, I think it's the most costly part of all of the operation. Truth is that Russia today, it's more assertive. They behave much bolder. I think they feel there is a greater role for them to play. To a great extent, still Russia feels to be self-identified with the losing of the Cold War, which is a strange thing to me. Let me touch a little bit on this, because when I went to Russia a few years ago, still in my defense capacity of the State Secretary, we were negotiating a few things, like we got a huge debt, unpaid debt, on Russian side from the old days. So we were negotiating how this will be repaid back to Slovakia. Then I had a discussion with President Putin's advisor on foreign policy. And just as an illustration of the climate, he said, this was just shortly before we joined NATO, and he asked me the question, Mr. State Secretary, why you want to join NATO? Are you aware that if you join NATO, you will get on the list of our enemies? And I have to tell you, this was so shocking concept to me at that time, which was not a long time ago. I'm talking 5 years ago. When I really didn't know what to answer at that point, and I said, Mr. Ambassador, was in rank of ambassador, I said, I don't know what to tell you on this. The only thing I can tell you is that I assure you that when we join NATO, you are not going to get on the list of our enemies. And then I ask, why are you still caught in this concept that you lost the Cold War, that you lost us, that you lost your space? Because to me, the Cold War was not a war of nations. This was war of concepts. Because Cold War was war of free trade, free democracy, whatever, a war of freedom in principle against the authoritarian rule of choice and dictate. And on this, my point here to Russians was, I thought that your leadership today and people of the country are on the winner's side. Because now you go for democracy, now you go for your choice. And I think we are all part of the same, we are all part of the same winning part. So why to use this strange, to me, very strange language? Unfortunately, still today, and I would not doubt that Russia is a today is a democratic country. It's having the very democratic fundamentals. It's got elections. They will go for new presidential elections. They will have new president. President Putin wouldn't do things like Hugo Chavez or some other clever leaders, so they could kind of knight it for the presidency for the rest of the life. So Russia is having good democratic credentials. But truth is, you saw it in the case of Belarus today, Ukraine. When Ukraine went a little bit bolder than they liked, it's so easy to cut on the pipeline. In Europe, German special link over this, and you might look at the role of Chancellor Schröder and his new occupation as he left the chancellery. There are some hidden concerns over this. Of course, Poles, they hate this shortcut. And of course, some other nations would hate it. But I think here we should be much more looking at the diversification from other sources, how we can use the southern link through Adriatic pipelines, look how we can make stronger the western. I think more sources you have, the safer you are. And it applies to the United States, but you've been doing this actually for your history.